the shortcut Fil-Am because it is the most non-binary way to describe us. And for most people, the Philippine X might be too long. For certain audiences, Philippine X might even be a bit controversial. There's a lot that we need to unpack with the way that we think about things. And that's why Fil-Am Fashion Week, as it occupies a tiny, tiny slice of the pie when it comes to like cultural advancement, we definitely focus on ourselves. So, my name is Lou. I am the president of Fil-Am Fashion Week. This is Vina. She is the vice president and co-founder of Fil-Am Fashion Week. And then we have Nerys over here, who is our advisor emeritus, practically. And so, we started Fil-Am Fashion Week truly as a form of kapwa. Not many people know that Fil-Am Fashion Week was once a NAFFAA project. By the NAFFAA PNW. I thought to myself, how am I going to gather people and grow a region and not just do the average dinner dance? Right? And so I figured, we're all participants of fashion one way or another. Whether we think we're into fashion or not, we just all are. Okay? Because every day that we make a decision to put something on and not come out naked, we obviously represent a certain ecological footprint when it comes to the materials and the supplies that came with all of those choices that we put on our backs. And my goal today is to kind of reframe our mindset on what we wear and how we wear what we wear. So let's talk about how fashion started. There's this little myth that the very first designers of the world, and you might be familiar with the story, were these two nudists who lived in a garden, and they ate from the wrong buffet, so they got kicked out of the garden. Outside the garden, you have to wear clothes because it's quite shameful out there, even though there was nobody out there, but then there was. So then they started designing their own stuff. Is that a familiar story to anyone? Whether or not it's true, fashion has always been something that even our predecessors, the Neanderthals, had practiced. And there's many reasons for that. And so number one is practicality, right? We have to put clothes on our back just to be able to be practical for whatever given reason. Can you all talk amongst yourselves how practicality and fashion take place within your own realities today? Talk amongst yourselves.
Like right now.
Right now, yeah.
I'm Leslie. Where are you from? Me too. Thanks. Regards. Well, everywhere, but currently regards.
Oh, you went to Bayside.
You went to Bayside?
No. No, I'm saying, I know this is Bayside.
Yeah.
So, no, I went to
And now I'm a teacher, of course. It's like,
my apartment's right by there, so my apartment's like right by.
In about 10 seconds, wrap up this conversation. We're going to have plenty of conversations.
how does fashion practicality
5 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Bring it back to the center. Fashion also is a function of comfort. Okay? And that's very important. And so talk amongst yourselves how we incorporate comfort into our daily wear through fashion.
You like clean your hair? Oh, yeah.
So they're like,
So it's like kind of like a glove. Because I find myself over my head. Yeah.
Give this about 5 more seconds. We'll have more time to talk.
Yeah.
Again, we're talking about how fashion and comfort coincide. In 3, 2, 1. So our ancestors, they actually incorporated tattoos, lots of symbolism there, lots of significance. And today, we're starting to finally reclaim that, right? So, in today, how do we incorporate communication and fashion within your realities? Go ahead and talk amongst yourselves. How do we incorporate communication when it comes to fashion within your lived realities? Talk amongst yourselves.
I don't like stuff things, but there's power of laser.
Yeah.
I have a very small team at my was teaching this.
Yeah.
But like you wear a blazer and come in the braids. So
Give us about 10 seconds to wrap up.
I also don't like the idea that I have to look or dress a certain way for someone to take me seriously. So as a teacher, I usually have t-shirts, sneakers,
5 seconds.
silly things, or long things. My friend made this for
3, 2, 1. Bring it back to the center for me. Now let's talk about how even back in pre-colonial times, fashion was a way that we identified our social status. And that still happens today. A lot. So please, talk amongst yourselves how we incorporate fashion within your lived realities or other contemporaries' lived realities, how fashion is a function of displaying social status.
like why does your white t-shirt cost more than mine? I think it says that brand is. There's LV.
Give it 10 more seconds.
You can see
Wrap up your conversations in 5 seconds. And in 3, 2, 1. Back to the center here.
there you go.
Let's now talk about how fashion amplifies authority, which we know it truly does. And so within your own lived realities or the other people that you know, talk amongst yourselves as far as how fashion amplifies authority.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Also no respect like the system, in a sense, or those who have to make decisions, think what's happening. I heard.
Give it 10 seconds.
I'm not sure how I feel about that, but yes.
Wrapping it up in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's talk about another function of fashion, okay? How fashion upholds unity. This is easy. How do we do that?
That's number one. Sorry to control, but they're number one.
Easily identify each other as
Number one, please.
Put back to what?
Take a picture of it.
On the very first slide. Okay, let's do that.
That one. No.
This was an easy topic, so let's wrap it up in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Last one.
Oh, I see it.
How does this promote identity? Okay? Talk about that for me. How does fashion promote identity? Here's an example. That's a national costume service catch 300 grade for the consumers test. Example number 1. What other examples do you have within your shared realities about how fashion promotes identity?
Can I ask a question or something? Comments or what?
Yes, she has a question.
Yes, ma'am.
This identity it's look like similar for the Thailand. It's not really Filipino, but it's a Igorot. But the Thailand also similar.
Actually, Tita, no, that's not Igorot. That's actually Bisaya. It's called the Pintados.
Oh,
Yeah, so back in the day, of course, we share culture because we are all seafarers around the Southeast Asia.
Okay.
Pintados is actually known to be one of the oldest pirates.
Okay.
So,
Yeah. Now
I'm actually very,
because Thailand is always talking
It's
like
similar.
that, you know. Like,
and I'm actually very glad that you asked that question. Like, that looks like this to me.
yes.
Because my next topic for us to talk about is, we talked about all the different ways that fashion affects us,
Yes.
but under whose terms?
I don't like that.
Oh.
I get that.
Filipino way.
So, we have a beautiful young lady who's going to be catcalled, and God forbid something happens to her, she might even be blamed for it. Why does that happen? So, under whose terms do we define the different functions of fashion? Go ahead and talk about that.
Yes. Just to show you. At least it'll have
Give it about 10 more seconds.
And also just remember who's our ancestors' powers that they do.
Wrapping it up in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. On the outside, we all might claim that we approach fashion in our own terms, but we belong to a collective that has been primed for over 400 years how to interpret what is fashion, what isn't, what is proper, what is not. Raise your hand if you are familiar with the caste system that our colonizers placed upon us. Okay? And so, what we know from this is that our own identities, the way that we dress, was drastically changed to assimilate to a particular group of dominant majority societies and communities, right? And we are heavily impacted by this. As a result, our standards are a little bit skewed, right? And not just within skincare, but also within fashion. Let's talk about pageantry, for example, right? Where pageantry is just one slice of fashion. And we know that in the motherland, there is such a high social capital value when you are Afro-thick. Does anybody disagree? Therefore, when it comes to representing us on a global platform, some people tend to think that there is a higher social capital when you are part colonizer. Because that's what we were taught, and that's what we continue to teach, sometimes indirectly, and sometimes we don't mean it, but it's just there. And so that's why we, as NAFFAA, are coming together to look at the different slices of the pie, how we can uplift ourselves from how we really were turned upside down as a society by our colonizers. So today, in this room, we're just going to talk about the slice of fashion. So, here we are. Filipino Americans in the United States, 4 million people strong. And I think one of Brendan's most famous lines is that we represent about $127 billion in buying power, right? But where does that buying power go? It goes back to colonizers. It goes back to Louis Vuitton, right? And all of the other brands that we have forced ourselves to not assimilate, but really like we're branding ourselves in this, aligning ourselves with that brand because that's what we think will uplift us. That's what we think makes us successful, right? So as immigrants, I want to talk about a very specific group of people who came here, okay, back in 1904. The 1,102 people from the Philippines, I think that's an estimate of a number, but they were brought here for the St. Louis World's Fair in Missouri back in 1904. Anybody familiar with what happened over 100 years ago? Perfect. So you know that there was this large exhibit. It was practically a human zoo of our ancestors, right? To show America how indigenous people lived, how the quality of life of people in the Philippines are so different from the quality of life that they live here. And so they brought over like 7 different tribes to pretty much perform daily rituals. They were asked to wear certain things that weren't even comfortable to this climate, weren't practical to this climate, the things that we were just talking about earlier. And so, basically, this was a function of showing what supremacy can be, right? By just demonstrating to others that, hey, this is what subhuman looks like. And that was us. And unfortunately, it didn't just happen in St. Louis. Matter of fact, this happened in my backyard. This was at the University of Washington. Okay? So, let's think back to our ancestors and what was comfortable then, what was practical then, and what was changed. So the girls are out. And that's great. And that is proper, right? Like, how dare contemporary society censor this, but not this? So, again, I ask, on whose terms do we define fashion? Okay? Because it was practical. And then, when we were colonized, that's when things changed. Okay? As a matter of fact, for an everyday dress like this, the alampay was actually forced down by the friars to cover women, because everyone was braziers back then. And so it is up to the women's responsibility to censor themselves so that men can function. Oh, the patriarchy, how funny that is. And that continues to affect us even today. So fortunately, through resilience and cultural identity, we're always going to be there to reclaim anything that's thrown on us, and we'll always put our own flavor on that stuff, right? So, what traditionally was the bell sleeves started to evolve to have more structure to become what is our bolero today. Now, after World War II happened, when a lot of society was decimated, people who were trying to recover, trying to get back to affluence, used fashion as that status symbol to tell others that, hey, we are finally back on our feet. And it didn't just happen in the Philippines, it happened in Europe, all over the place. In fact, that's how Dior became so popular, right? And that's how even one of our own historic designers, Slim Higgins, Salvation Lim Higgins, popularized the butterfly sleeves. But through globalization, we know that a dominant majority and all of their narratives will be heavily applied upon us, which we're like, all right, let's do it. Because of 400 years worth of submission. And we don't just see that in the Philippines, we see that all over the place. Places like Iran, places like South America. And so the erasure of our identity is a very, very real thing. That's where we come in as Fil-Am Fashion Week to say, hey, we deserve this space. We are just as mainstream and we are just as damn fucking good. Because we are. However, we have our own perspective of how to approach this in what we think is the right way. Okay? And that's through shared culture, not just being a culture bearer, but also a culture sharer. And at the same time, approaching sustainability. Because when you bring back erased culture, you're already decolonizing. And when we define colonization as the habit of reaping all the resources around the world, sustainability and protecting those resources is yet another form of decolonization. Most people think of this word decolonization as something so radical. It's actually not. Absolutely not. You want to order a steak from a fancy restaurant and a side of rice? Go for it. So, what do we do as an organization? So, we are a fashion week, meaning we have multiple days of activities. Our social function, our social event is our white party. Now we know that white parties have a bad rap because of all the other white parties taking place, but ours is different. We choose to wear white so that we can demonstrate and show and exhibit everybody's melanin. The contrast in that. Okay? So by getting everybody to showcase their melanin, that is the perfect icebreaker for this cultural event. And that's why everybody wears white. That's why it's a white party. Sometimes there are fashion shows that happens at these white parties, sometimes there's not. But we do throw the best white parties.
Yes.
We also conduct symposiums. Symposiums are the most educational events of Fil-Am Fashion Week. And education is the part that always gets left behind because vanity comes first, right? And that's too sad. And so that's why I always force this educational piece. Whether we're talking about indigenous fashion, whether we're talking about upcycling. Matter of fact, our last symposium challenge was an upcycling challenge. And then, here's our main runway shows. In our main runway shows, we don't just showcase designers and artists of Philippine descent. We showcase each and every designer. The reason being, we, as a trade show production company, producing fashion shows and showcasing small businesses, designers, we don't just showcase Filipinx designers. We want to showcase non-Filipinx designers to the Filipino market as well. And so, when we have non-Filipino designers participate with Fil-Am Fashion Week, we tell them to study our aesthetic, study our artistic language, figure out how not to appropriate that, but at the same time, discover how you can be a culture sharer, right? Because we all can be culture sharers for other cultures and be culture bearers for our own. And so, our main fashion show is intended to elevate who we are and what we do through the slice of fashion. As a matter of fact, for this particular piece, your designer is standing right over there. Let's talk about this magical land where we're at, right? Where we're all dressing up to be who we are. It's supposed to be a melting pot, but as an immigrant, my experience is that it's more like a charcuterie. The cheeses stay over there, the darker cheeses stay over there, the cheeses that speak English are over there, the cheeses that speak only Tagalog are over here. Am I wrong? And then, we do live in a capitalist society, it just is what it is, but there is this law of supply and demand, and that's what we as consumers to fashion have the power to change. Because here's kind of how it affects us right now as a disenfranchised community. So let's say that we are on the shorter end of the stick, we don't have much money to spend, therefore these sales always try to catch us, right? The reality though is the difference of that price, because it's so cheap to us, is paid by somebody else. I'm going to explain why in just a few. Now, has anybody ever heard of the term fast fashion? Right? So, Fast fashion, if you haven't heard of it, is the concept of like purchasing low quality garments at a very, very low price at the fastest available opportunity, just so you can access that. And as a result, 3 out of 5 clothing ends up in landfill within 12 months. And where does that go? It goes to disenfranchised places like Africa, South America, and it's just all over their neighborhoods. Our garbage is in their neighborhoods. And we have the power to reduce that and even stop that. So, for fashion today, the main target market are women. On average, women's clothing is worn 7 times only before it ends up in landfill or the garbage. And that's why, I dare say that you have to be a better consumer, because if you're just going to wear a piece of sheet and buy a bunch of those, then you're going to have a closet full of sheet, right? Which makes your style full of sheet, right? And who would want that? So again, we just have to change our mindsets. Because if we don't, the people that pay for that are our brown contemporaries from other countries. We know there's always the children and the women that are exploited for the lowest rates, right? So that we can afford these sales. What you can do as an active participant to saving the world is, before you say yes to an item, look at the tag, use your magical portals, your cell phones to look at what are the current conditions of labor standards in that country, made in so-and-so. Then that's how you decide to put it down. Maybe save yourself money. Because again, these low prices, somebody else is paying for it, and in certain times, at some of the highest prices. And we don't even know about that. So that's why we at Fil-Am Fashion Week, we want to change mindsets. Our designers, again, they are encouraged to showcase culture, whether it's theirs or ours. They are also encouraged to use dead stock fabric that have been cut up into other pieces, extra fabric from a certain roll. So we really want to reduce the amount of resources that's being used. And even in doing so, we come up with some of the most amazing stuff, right? That is our resilience at play. Now, we all have the ability to be creative, to reduce. As a matter, one thing that I know some people who are not local here did was this little exercise when they packed their suitcase. And so you don't have to stock your closet with so many things that are just going to be worn 7 times before they're going to be thrown out, right? You just really have to buy with quality and just do a little bit of work. Exercise your creativity, mix and match, be stylish. Because if we do that, that's how we really uplift ourselves as a community when we think about the world as well. So there's lots of people within our own community who already have accomplished certain things to elevate our name. But what we can do here as people is change our mindset, right? In thoughts and words and in actions. So here's what I want you to think about. Consumerism with dignity. Anybody know what the powered culture is? Powered culture is simply a function of dynamic pricing. The fact that gas can cost one rate at a particular neighborhood and something else in a different neighborhood because it's tied to a different target market. However, we shouldn't be making tawa if we're pulling out our cash from this particular colonizing brand that we never asked a discount for, never dared to, So it's that opposite of bayanihan where we dare do that to a fellow Filipino just because we know we can and just because we know it's our culture. And so I'm hoping that you can spread that message to everybody that If you have lifted yourself up and you can't afford to pay that full price, absolutely do it. Do not ask for tawad. Because tawad is a function of dynamic pricing. Therefore, in the law of dynamic pricing, my prices are exactly as full as that purse. And if you just can't afford something that a person trying to survive is trying to charge, but you really appreciate their craft, then just say, Ate, I really like your work. Can't afford it right now. I just Venmo you $10 in case the next person after me makes tawad. Pay it forward. Do that type of bayanihan. Give back what you can afford. Because really, it's just us saving each other. There's kind of no one else for us right now, especially in this administration, right? So then, I also want to have people explore the concept of commerce with integrity. If you have friends who are starting to sell stuff, create stuff, huwag naman kayo mamudol, right? Keep your prices with integrity. But also, pay attention to dynamic pricing because you have to know your worth. But in order to know your worth, you really have to know your integrity. And then lastly, fashion with compassion. Like I was talking about before, when you pick up a piece of clothing, where it's made, and you study whether or not you should be purchasing that, that is an example of fashion with compassion. So these three tenements that we just talked about, the entire concept of thinking about our identity, exploring under whose terms we're dressing up for, all of that can be applied in our choices in these three different behaviors. And that is really where decolonizing fashion starts. For instance, let's talk about going to an interview. Obviously, know your audience. Can you wear cute indigenous earrings? You should be able to. And if you are in a space where you are the one making these decisions of authority and hiring someone, well, prime yourself to celebrate that fashion choice rather than docking it as unprofessional. Because again, under whose terms are we defining what is professional, right? So let's talk about like the most patriarchal symbol in fashion right now is the tie, right? It's just a piece of rope that you tie. There's different ways to use that. It doesn't always have to be the way that they tell us how they've used it, because we are us, right? Again, under whose terms. And also, when you shop new, it's okay to shop new, even though we should really be shopping used or vintage, because at the end of it all, a piece of vintage clothing started out new somewhere. It's just that the quality was made a lot better. And when the quality is made a lot better, it can be upcycled. So, right now, I'm going to have the designer of Roots Reimagined talk a little bit about how she selected the quality pieces that then become something else, is given a new life, is given a second chance for the world to see. So please give a warm round of applause for Ms. Maurice Orvis, who is also the NAFFAA PNW president.
Yes. Hi, my name is Ms. Orvis. I wear so many hats, and the recent addition to that is now I'm a designer. Oh, and YC and all the plus in the alphabet. Okay, let's start with these two pieces. So, as you can see, look at me bring it back. So when he told me that I'm going to be in the main show, I'm supposed to be only doing the sustainability part of our film fashion.
You talking about Greg?
Then are we? Yes, at the home. Greg, please. So he said like, okay, well, make a piece that would like be your main page. I was like, okay. And so Tita Mary Ann, whose mom, went to the Philippines and brought the buckets. Originally, I wanted dirty ice cream amang sopetero, because it's summer and all that. I think it's gonna be complicated. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna settle for taho. So that's where the idea came from. And then regarding, so that's how the styling, I envisioned it to be like that. And then I borrowed the salakon, because I don't have my own salakon. Anyway, so this is my son's middle school graduation barong. So this is, he's now graduated high school. Then he's going to, this is a 4-year-old barong. This one I got it from Etsy because unfortunately it's very expensive expensive to actually contact a company in Kalinga and then have them ship it here. But there are a lot of brands in the Philippines that are being sold via Etsy. So I bought the Fil-Am fabric from Etsy. This one you'll be surprised. This is actually a curtain. It's a sheer curtain. This is a curtain. And I put it in a bell, and I was like, you know what? Perfect combination with the taho and the sarapon. So I am not only sustaining Mother Earth, and I'm also very proud of the Kalinga in the bell fabric. Now the next one, this had been my blazer for like, oh my god. I bought this in a flea market in France. So we were with our family, we got stationed twice in Europe. I love thrifting, I love going to, because Europe, this is what I love Europe that I think that the American market should start doing. Every weekend there is a flea market. Like every weekend in all of this. The smaller the European cities is, the more thriving the market is. So I bought this from France, 8-9 years ago. The first time we got stationed there, I still, back then I only have one kid. Now I have two. Anywho, so I bought this and I was like, oh, you know what? Guess what? It's actually made in the Philippines. Yes, and then I chopped it off. I was like, what's going to be my top? So the sleeves now became the top. So I made a two-top out of the sleeves. But if you are a little more braver, this one actually buttons. I just added the button, and you can just do boosting. It depends on again whose turn. Whose turn, right? This one is an in the bell fabric. Again, I had one that I didn't like the actual bolero part of it, so I chopped it off and then added this one. Okay, added more yes, design. And then this one, you'll be surprised. Guess what it is? It is actually a wrap. It's a wrap. Yeah. It's all winter wrap. And then I made it into a skirt. Because I'm very much fascinated with the hablon. Hablon is a woven design. You know the patachong growing up? Yes, that's hablon. Just like this. And then I made it into this. This is the giveaway, that's all you know, it's a wrap. It's like the pashima. So out of this, how many? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 thrifted pieces that I made into something new and made it into the runway. And I must say that this one is the most photographed of all the pieces that was there in the runway. How much it cost? Practically the barong is free. The only thing that actually cost me is this woven fabric because I ordered it in Etsy. This one is free. It's been in my house because it's a sheer curtain. So that's it. So again, you only need imagination, and I think if you are more connected to your roots, you know who you are, and you can be more expressive of who you are, and that's what fashion is to me. And thank you for listening.
The moral of that story is that if you choose to invest $200 to $500 for something you're going to wear to a gala, would you choose to be an individual, right, and actually like increase that $127,000 billion buying power to even higher by giving it back to us or back to corporatism? And that piece that you're going to choose at the mall is probably owned by several other people. I've seen pageants before where 2 women wore the same gown, different colors. Again, because of the choices that they made. And so we're here in front of you today in the hope that if you learn something valuable and you wholeheartedly believe that your own communities should learn a little bit about this, that selfie that I had you take earlier, go ahead and follow us on Instagram. Send that to us so that we can engage in conversation, because Fil-Am Fashion Week can be a fundraiser for these different NAFFAA chapters these different organizations who choose to do a fashion show instead of a gala. So once again, folks, thank you so much. I hope that we continue to thrive in your thoughts, like our content, follow us. I hope that you continue to live out what we talked about today in words. Please engage in conversation within social media. And I hope that what we learned today, you will take in action. And so, my name is Lou Vargas. I am the president and founder of Fil-Am Fashion Week. Thank you all for having me today.